John Franklin was a man who had built a kingdom from nothing. He was a billionaire, a man known all over America for his sharp mind, his strong will, and his unshakable confidence. His name was on the biggest buildings, the largest companies, and the most famous charities. To many, John was a symbol of success. A man who could do anything. But behind the powerful image, behind the luxury cars and the endless meetings, John was tired. Deep inside, his body was sending him quiet warnings, small signs he tried to ignore. He was always busy running his companies, signing important deals, giving speeches on TV. His health was the last thing on his mind. One cold winter morning, in the middle of January, John woke up feeling weak. He sat up slowly in his big bed, the soft light from the window touching his face. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. Usually, he was full of energy by this time, ready to start the day. But today, something was wrong. He tried to stand, but the room seemed to spin. He put a hand on the wall to steady himself. For a moment, the world went dark. He fell back onto the bed, his heart pounding. The housekeeper, Martha, was in the kitchen when she heard a sudden thud. She dropped the glass she was holding and ran to the bedroom. There she found John lying on the floor, pale and struggling to breathe. "Mr. Franklin. Are you okay?" Martha asked, her voice shaking. She was a strong woman, calm in many difficult situations, but seeing John like this frightened her. John tried to speak but only managed a weak whisper. Martha quickly called for help. Within minutes, paramedics arrived. They carefully lifted John onto a stretcher and rushed him to the hospital. The doctors in the emergency room worked fast. They ran test after test. His blood pressure was dangerously low. His heart rhythm was irregular. But nothing clearly explained why. John was moved to intensive care. 20 of the best doctors were called in to help him. Specialists in heart problems, lung diseases, brain injuries, all were trying to find the cause. Machines beeped, screens showed numbers and waves. But no one could say what was wrong. Days passed. John lay in a hospital bed, unconscious much of the time. Nurses changed his sheets, gave him medicine, and checked his vitals. The doctors talked quietly in corners, showing worry on their faces. They had treated many patients, but this case was unusual. Martha stayed close. Though she was not a doctor, she understood people better than most. She had worked for John's family for over 15 years, through good times and bad. She knew when he was happy, when he was tired, and when something was wrong. At the mansion, everything seemed frozen. The grand house was quiet without John there. The staff walked carefully, trying not to disturb the heavy silence. News of John's illness spread quickly. Reporters waited outside the hospital, asking questions. Investors watched the stock market nervously. The whole country seemed to hold its breath. John's family was devastated. His wife, Helen, stayed by his side day and night. Their 2 children, Emily and David, took turns keeping watch. But no one could find answers. Martha, however, noticed small details that no one else saw. She remembered the way John's face twitched in pain when he took his morning coffee before his collapse. She recalled the nights he stayed awake, restless and sweating. The way his hands shook slightly when he held his pen. These things were not important to the doctors, they had machines and tests. But sometimes, the body speaks in quiet ways. One afternoon, Martha sat in the kitchen, thinking deeply. The house was large, with many rooms and many secrets. She had cleaned and cared for this place for years. She knew where everything was, and what usually happened. She remembered that John loved a special kind of herbal tea, chamomile with a touch of honey. It was his comfort drink before bed. But in the last few weeks, she noticed the tea bag boxes were different. The smell was sharper, almost bitter. At first, she thought it was nothing. But now, with John so sick, her mind raced. Curious and worried, Martha looked around the kitchen carefully. She opened cabinets and checked shelves. Behind the cleaning supplies, she found a small bottle with a strange label. It was a poison, but disguised as something harmless. Her heart pounded as she held it in her hands. She didn't know how the poison got there, or who put it. But she knew it was important. She thought of the doctors, all their machines and tests. Maybe they were looking in the wrong direction. Martha decided she had to do something. She knew she was just the housekeeper, and no one might listen to her. But she couldn't stay silent. That evening, she went to the hospital. The waiting room was crowded with reporters and family. She found the head doctor, Dr. Harrison, a tall man with kind eyes and a serious expression. "Doctor, I need to speak with you," Martha said, trying to keep her voice calm. Dr. Harrison looked surprised. "Of course, Mrs. Martha. What is it?" She explained what she had found: the bottle, the change in the tea, the small signs she had noticed in John. At first, the doctor was skeptical. He had seen many patients and many stories. But something in Martha's voice made him listen. "Can you tell me everything you know?" Dr. Harrison asked. Martha described the weeks before John's collapse. The way he changed, the things she saw in the house. She told him about the bottle and where she found it. Dr. Harrison nodded slowly. "Thank you, Martha. This might be important. We will run some new tests." The next day, the hospital staff started testing for poison. They checked everything in John's blood and organs. Slowly, the picture became clear. John was not sick because of his heart or lungs. He was being slowly poisoned. A rare substance had been put into his drinks, a poison that was hard to detect. The doctors had been fighting the wrong battle all along. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Martha's discovery gave hope. She didn't know who was responsible or why someone wanted to hurt John. But she was ready to find out. John's family was shocked when the doctors told them. They could hardly believe that someone would try to harm John in such a secret way. But the evidence was clear. John was a man used to control. He controlled businesses, money, even people. But now, he was vulnerable. And only Martha, the quiet woman who worked in the background, had seen the truth. John's fight was not over. The battle to save him had changed. The doctors had a new plan, but time was running out. Martha sat by John's bedside, holding his hand. She whispered, "We will find the answers, Mr. Franklin. You're going to be okay." For the first time in days, a small movement came from John's fingers. Outside, the winter wind blew cold. Inside, hope was beginning to grow. After the shocking discovery of poison in John Franklin's system, the hospital became a center of quiet urgency, with doctors working day and night to find the right treatment. John remained unconscious, but his body was slowly reacting to the new medicines, giving a flicker of hope to everyone who cared about him. Martha, the housekeeper, had become more than just an observer. She was now a vital part of the effort to save John. Although she had no medical training, her knowledge of John's daily habits and her sharp eyes for details made her indispensable. She spent hours at the hospital, sitting quietly by John's bedside, watching the machines and noticing the small changes in his breathing and pulse. The doctors respected her, even though she was not a part of their world. They began to realize that sometimes, the smallest clues come from the people who see life from outside the usual circles. Meanwhile, the mystery of who could have poisoned John deepened. The staff at the mansion grew nervous. There was tension in the air, and trust became fragile. Martha remembered overhearing hushed conversations among the household staff and sensed that someone was hiding something. She quietly began to observe the people around her, the cooks, the gardeners, the drivers, and their subtle reactions whenever the topic of John's illness came up. She noticed how some avoided her gaze, how others whispered behind closed doors. Her instincts told her that the poison was not an accident but a planned act. One evening, after the hospital staff had left and the mansion was quiet, Martha found herself searching through John's private study. She was careful, knowing this was risky, but the need for answers was stronger than fear. Behind a row of books, she discovered a hidden drawer filled with letters and documents. Among them was a letter from a business rival, a man who had publicly threatened John months before his illness. The letter was cold and filled with anger. It mentioned paying the price for standing in the way of a major deal. Martha felt a chill run down her spine. This was the first real clue that the poison might be connected to John's business enemies. The next morning, Martha shared her findings with Dr. Harrison, who was deeply concerned but thankful for her persistence. The doctor promised to involve the police and launch an official investigation. John's family was torn between fear and hope. Helen, John's wife, tried to stay strong for their children but broke down in private moments. Emily and David, his children, took turns sitting at the hospital, sometimes holding their father's hand, sometimes staring at the monitors, hoping for a miracle. Meanwhile, John's condition slowly improved. The poison was being flushed out of his system, and his body was responding to the treatment. Small signs of life returned: a squeeze of a hand, a twitch of a finger, a faint opening of an eye. The doctors were cautious but encouraged. They knew the road ahead would be long and hard, but for the first time, they believed John could recover. Martha continued her silent vigil, often talking to John as if he could hear her. She told him stories from the house, about the way the snow fell outside the windows, about the garden where the flowers were starting to bloom despite the cold. She reminded him of his strength, not as a billionaire or a powerful man, but as a person who had touched many lives. Outside the hospital walls, the media frenzy grew. Reporters speculated about the poisoning, about the enemies who might have wanted John dead, about the billionaire saved by his housekeeper. Martha, however, ignored the noise. Her focus was only on John and finding the truth. She met quietly with the police detectives who came to the hospital, sharing what she knew, and urging them to look deeper into the people closest to John. The detectives found evidence of unusual behavior in the mansion staff: missing items, strange phone calls, and secret meetings. Slowly, the puzzle began to come together. But Martha knew that uncovering the full truth would take time. She also realized that John's survival was not just about medicine or money but about the courage to face danger and the kindness of those who care. As John's strength returned, so did his awareness. One day, after weeks in a coma, he opened his eyes and saw Martha sitting by his side. A weak smile appeared on his lips. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse but full of gratitude. Martha squeezed his hand gently, tears in her eyes. She knew this was only the beginning. The fight to find the person behind the poison, to protect John's life and legacy, was far from over. But in that quiet hospital room, hope was alive, and a new chapter was about to begin. As John slowly regained consciousness and strength in the hospital, the world around him was changing too, in ways he had never expected. The poison that had nearly taken his life was only the beginning of a deeper story, one filled with secrets, trust, and betrayal, and Martha, the housekeeper who had spotted what the doctors missed, was now at the center of it all. John's family stayed close, but the atmosphere was heavy with worry and uncertainty. Helen tried her best to be strong, but even she felt the weight of what had happened. Emily and David, his children, remained quiet, trying to process the shock and fear. Meanwhile, Martha continued her silent watch, observing the staff at the mansion with a sharp eye, noticing small changes that others overlooked: furtive glances, whispered conversations behind closed doors, and moments when people seemed to avoid her. She had always been loyal to John, but now she knew loyalty meant finding the truth, no matter how painful it might be. One afternoon, she overheard two employees talking nervously about a meeting late at night in the garden, a place no one usually gathered after dark. Driven by curiosity and a growing sense of responsibility, Martha decided to follow. She stayed hidden in the shadows and listened carefully. The voices she heard were hushed, but the words carried a threatening tone. The men spoke of money, power, and the price to pay for crossing certain lines. They mentioned John's name with anger and resentment. Martha's heart raced. She realized these men might be connected to the poison, or at least knew who was behind it. She took mental notes, knowing she would share everything with the police. At the hospital, Dr. Harrison continued to update John's family on his condition. The poison had damaged some organs, but John's will to live was strong. The treatment was working, but there was still a long road ahead. Physical therapy was arranged, and John's muscles began to respond again. The slow progress gave hope to all. John's mind was sharp, despite his weakened body. He asked questions, wanting to understand what had happened. Martha sat with him, recounting everything she knew, carefully avoiding speculation but never hiding the truth about the poison and the growing investigation. John was shocked but grateful. He realized how much he had taken for granted: the people who worked quietly behind the scenes, the small details he had ignored in his busy life. The poison had almost destroyed him, but it also opened his eyes. With help from the police, Martha began to look more closely into John's business rivals and personal relationships. She discovered that John had made enemies over the years, men who lost fortunes or opportunities because of his success. Some of these men had been seen near the mansion in recent weeks. Others had sent threatening messages, but John had dismissed them as empty threats. Now, those threats seemed very real. The detectives uncovered evidence that some of John's trusted employees had been in contact with suspicious characters, raising serious questions about loyalty and betrayal. Martha was saddened by this, but she stayed strong, determined to protect John. John's family also began to unite in a new way. Helen, Emily, and David put aside their differences and focused on helping John recover and supporting Martha's efforts to find the truth. They realized that without Martha's courage and care, John might have died. The media, too, caught wind of the story: a billionaire poisoned, saved by his housekeeper, and surrounded by mystery. Reporters wanted to interview Martha, but she politely refused, wanting to keep the focus on John's recovery and the investigation. One day, John's recovery took a hopeful step forward. He managed to sit up in bed, supported by the doctors and nurses. He looked at Martha, his eyes filled with gratitude and newfound respect. "You saved my life," he said quietly, his voice weak but sincere. Martha smiled gently, I only did what anyone who cares would do. John's journey was far from over, but his spirit had been renewed. He knew he had to face not only his illness but also the hidden dangers that still threatened him. Together with Martha, his family, and the police, John prepared to uncover the full truth. He wanted to protect his loved ones, his company, and the legacy he had worked so hard to build. As John grew stronger, he began to remember moments from the days before he fell ill, meetings with business partners, strange phone calls, and the feeling that someone was watching him. He shared these memories with Martha and the detectives. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. The poison was not just an attack on his life, it was a message, a warning from those who wanted to take control of his empire. Martha stayed close, helping John regain his strength through gentle encouragement and constant care. She reminded him that strength comes not only from the body but from the heart and mind. The bond between them deepened, built on trust and respect. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to reveal surprising connections. Some of John's closest advisors had been meeting secretly with rivals, plotting moves that could harm John's business. The police began to question these men, uncovering motives tied to greed and jealousy. John was shocked to learn that some people he trusted had betrayed him. It was painful but necessary. As the truth unfolded, John became determined to rebuild not just his health but his life and legacy. He planned to make changes in his company, to bring in honest people who shared his vision. He also wanted to support Martha and others like her, those whose quiet strength often goes unnoticed but who can make the greatest difference. One evening, as John rested in his hospital room, Martha sat beside him and spoke softly about hope and courage. She told him stories of the people she had met over the years, of kindness and resilience. John listened, feeling the warmth of her words. For the first time in weeks, he smiled fully. The road ahead was still difficult, but John knew he was not alone. With Martha's help, his family's love, and the determination of the police, he was ready to face whatever came next. Outside the hospital, the city buzzed with news of the billionaire's recovery and the unfolding mystery. People were inspired by the story of a man saved not just by doctors but by a housekeeper's careful eyes and brave heart. Martha's courage reminded everyone that sometimes, the smallest voices can be the strongest, and the greatest battles are won with kindness and truth. And so, as the sun set on another day, John closed his eyes and took a deep breath, ready to wake up to a new beginning, one where trust would be earned again, justice would be found, and hope would lead the way. As John Franklin's strength returned day by day, the battle to uncover the truth about his poisoning became even more intense, drawing everyone deeper into a web of secrets, lies, and hidden motives that stretched far beyond the walls of his mansion. With Martha's unwavering dedication and sharp instincts guiding the way, the police investigation gained new momentum, revealing that the danger to John was not just from one enemy but possibly from several who had reasons to see him fall. Including rivals hungry for power, disgruntled employees, and even people close to him whose loyalty was now in question, making the fight not only about survival but also about trust and betrayal. Martha spent countless hours reviewing the documents and evidence she had helped collect, working closely with detectives to piece together the timeline of events leading to John's illness, while also standing as a quiet pillar of support by his bedside, reminding him gently that even the strongest men need help and that the truth would come to light. John, though still weak, was growing more determined every day to take back control of his life and business, understanding for the first time how fragile success could be and how important it was to listen to the voices often ignored. Like Martha's, the relationship between John and Martha deepened into a true partnership, built on respect, trust, and gratitude, and John made plans to not only recover fully but to change the way he lived and led, promising to value the people who had stood by him in his darkest hours. Meanwhile, the mansion's atmosphere had changed. The staff grew more cautious, knowing that the police were watching, and some who had seemed loyal now found themselves under suspicion. Martha noticed the shift and quietly kept her eyes and ears open, refusing to let fear stop her from protecting John. Helen, John's wife, while still overwhelmed by the stress and worry, began to understand Martha's importance in their lives, and the family slowly came together, united by the crisis and their shared hope for John's recovery. As the investigation uncovered evidence of secret meetings and financial transactions meant to weaken John's companies, more names emerged: powerful people who saw John's empire as something to be taken, not built. John listened carefully to every report, anger and sadness mixing in his heart, but also a new sense of purpose rising stronger than ever before. One afternoon, while reviewing files, John found a letter addressed to him, written in a hand he recognized, a former business partner who had once been a friend but turned rival years ago. The letter contained threats and demands, proof that the poisoning was part of a larger plan to take over John's empire. John shared this discovery with Martha and the police, who promised to protect him and his family. The detectives increased security around the mansion and John's hospital room, aware that those who wanted John gone might try again. Despite the danger, John refused to be afraid. With Martha's steady presence and the support of his family and doctors, he focused on healing his body and preparing for the fight ahead. Every small step of recovery was celebrated: a stronger heartbeat, the ability to speak clearly, and eventually, standing with support for the first time. These moments gave John hope and reminded him that life, even when fragile, was precious and worth fighting for. Martha continued to share stories of courage and kindness from her own life, inspiring John to believe in the good still left in the world. Outside the hospital, the media continued to follow the story, but Martha asked for privacy, wanting the focus to remain on John's health and the search for justice rather than sensational headlines. Friends and business associates visited quietly, offering their support and promising to help rebuild the companies once John was strong again. The long nights at the hospital became a time of reflection for John, who thought deeply about what had happened and what kind of man he wanted to be moving forward. He realized that money and power were not the most important things. Kindness, honesty, and loyalty mattered more than anything. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with orange and pink, John looked at Martha and said, "You saved more than my life. You saved my soul." Martha smiled softly, knowing that their journey was just beginning but confident that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The poison had almost ended John's story, but instead, it had opened a new chapter, one filled with hope, courage, and the determination to rebuild not just a business empire but a life grounded in trust and love. As the hospital lights dimmed for the night, John and Martha shared a quiet moment, both aware that the road to full recovery and justice would be long, but ready to walk it side by side, stronger than ever. The weeks passed slowly but steadily, and John Franklin's recovery became a symbol of hope not only for his family but also for everyone who had followed his story. As the mystery of the poisoning unfolded and justice began to take shape, with Martha's keen observations and courageous heart guiding the investigation, the police finally gathered enough evidence to arrest those responsible: a group of former business associates and a few trusted employees who had betrayed John out of greed and jealousy. Their carefully planned scheme now exposed for all to see, and the courtroom drama that followed captured the attention of the nation, reminding people that even the richest and most powerful are not immune to the dangers of deceit, yet also showing that courage and truth can overcome darkness. John, though still rebuilding his strength, faced the legal battles with calm determination, supported by his family, Martha, and a team of loyal friends who had stood by him through the storm. And he promised to use his experience to create a better future not only for himself but for those who had helped save him, including Martha, whose unwavering loyalty had been his true salvation. The bond between John and Martha grew even stronger as they worked together to heal the wounds left by betrayal and fear, with John learning to appreciate the quiet strength of those around him and Martha gaining a new confidence, knowing she had made a difference that went far beyond her role as a housekeeper. Helen, Emily, and David, who had once struggled with their own fears and doubts, now stood united with John, their family stronger because they had faced hardship together. And as John slowly returned to his role in the business world, he brought with him a new vision, one of honesty, kindness, and respect for the people who built the foundation of his success. He made changes to his company's leadership, ensuring that trust and integrity were valued above all else, and he set up programs to help employees and community members who, like Martha, often went unseen but were essential to the true strength of the organization. Martha's life changed too. John rewarded her loyalty and courage not with money alone but with respect and friendship, offering her new opportunities for growth and learning, and she took these chances with grace and humility, proud that her quiet watchfulness had helped save a life and bring justice to light. Together, they showed the world that heroes do not always wear suits or stand in the spotlight, but sometimes wear simple uniforms and notice the things others miss, and that compassion and bravery come in many forms. John often reflected on how close he had come to losing everything and how Martha's sharp eyes and kind heart had been his saving grace, and he vowed never to take life or the people in it for granted again. As the seasons changed, John's health improved dramatically, and he returned to his home with his family and Martha by his side, feeling stronger and more alive than ever before. The mansion, once filled with silence and fear, was now a place of laughter and light, where trust was rebuilt brick by brick, and though the scars of betrayal remained, they served as a reminder of the strength found in facing life's darkest moments with courage and love. The story of the billionaire who was almost lost but saved by his housekeeper became a powerful lesson for everyone that success is not just about wealth or power, but about the connections we build, the kindness we show, and the courage to stand up for truth no matter the cost. As John looked out at the sunset from his home, with Martha and his family beside him, he felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the darkest times had passed and that the future, though uncertain, was full of hope, and in that hope, he found the greatest strength of all.